I never thought the hum of a subway train could feel like a heartbeat. But for me, growing up in Atlanta, that rhythm was everything. It was the sound of people moving, working, hustling, never standing still. My mama used to say, "Baby, the world don't wait for nobody. You better learn to keep your pace." She knew what she was talking about. Mama worked nights as a nurse at Grady Hospital. 12-hour shifts, sometimes double shifts, just to keep food on our table and the lights on. She'd come home when the sun was rising, smelling like antiseptic and tired hope. She'd peel off her shoes, rub her swollen feet, and still find a way to smile at me. That's the kind of woman she was. Never let me feel the weight she carried. Even though I saw it in the way her shoulders slumped when she thought I wasn't looking. And then there was my grandma. Lord, my grandma was the kind of woman who could slice through anybody's nonsense with a single look. She raised 6 kids on her own after my granddaddy passed. She had this saying, she said it so often it felt carved into the air we breathed. Keep your receipts. Not about shopping. She meant life, proof, evidence. She'd say, people gone, doubt you. Baby, people gone, twist your words. Steal your shine. But if you keep your receipts, your work, your truth, your faith, they can't erase you. I didn't know it then, but those words would be the anchor I clung to when the storm came. My childhood was split between 2 worlds. On one hand, there was the neighborhood, block parties, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air, corner stores that knew your name, the constant bass line of somebody's cousin blasting music too loud from a beat-up Chevy. On the other hand, there was school, private school, across town. Mama scraped every dime, filled out every scholarship form, begged favors so I could sit in classrooms with kids who looked nothing like me. Kids whose parents had last names that carried weight in this city. I learned early what it meant to code switch. At school, I sharpened my voice to sound professional, like the anchors on CNN. At home, I let it soften, let it sing. Both sides were me, but sometimes it felt like neither one was enough. What saved me was the computer lab. Old desktops, the kind that groaned when you booted them up. I'd stay late, fingers clacking, trying to figure out lines of code that didn't make sense at first, but slowly started to bend to my will. It felt like magic, the power to build something from nothing but logic and persistence. By high school, I was the computer girl, the one they called when the printer jammed. When the network crashed, teachers would sigh in relief when I walked into the room because they knew I could fix what they couldn't. That wasn't just skill, it was survival. In a world where my name didn't open doors, I was determined to make my hands and my mind the keys. When acceptance letters came, I only had eyes for one: Howard University, an HBCU, a place where my blackness wouldn't be a footnote, but the headline. I can still remember the first time I walked onto the yard. The energy crackled, brothers and sisters dressed sharp, talking dreams into existence like they were already facts. Professors who demanded excellence but also understood where you came from, what it cost to sit in that seat. Howard made me believe I belonged. It gave me language for what I had felt but never said. That I wasn't just fighting to get ahead for myself. I was carrying the prayers of my mama, my grandma, my whole block. That's also where I met mentors who pushed me harder than I thought I could stand. One professor, Dr. Ellis, pulled me aside after class one day. He tapped my notebook, covered in scribbles, lines of code, business ideas, half-formed plans, and said, "You're building for the long game. Aisha, don't ever trade your vision for a shortcut." I didn't know how much that advice would cost me later. Graduating from Howard was the proudest day of my life. Mama wore her best church hat, beaming like she had walked across that stage herself. Grandma squeezed my hand so tight it left marks. They called my name, Aisha Morgan, and I swear for a second I felt the whole family behind me. Those who were there and those who had gone on. And then came New York. Midtown Manhattan. Glass towers so tall they made me dizzy. Redwood Global. My dream job. A place that promised innovation, influence, a seat at the table. I thought I was ready. I thought all those nights of grinding, all those words of wisdom, had armored me for whatever came next. But nothing could prepare me for the toast. The night that would change everything. The night of the toast started like any other company celebration: polished glass, cold champagne, and people pretending they weren't competing with the person standing right beside them. I had just wrapped a brutal quarter. My team, no, my people, had pulled off a miracle, salvaging a failing contract worth millions. The kind of save that doesn't just keep a company afloat, it cements reputations. And this one had my fingerprints all over it. I'd written code until my eyes burned, negotiated with vendors who swore they'd walk, pulled 16-hour days until the security guards started greeting me by name. So when the email came, all hands celebration, rooftop, 7 p.m., I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe all those years of swallowing microaggressions, of being talked over in meetings, of having my ideas recycled and credited to someone else, were about to pay off. I put on my sharpest blazer. Black, tailored, the kind that whispered power without screaming for attention. Mama had sent it to me after my first promotion. Dress for the seat they don't think you deserve, she'd said. I walked into that rooftop party with my head high. New York glittered around us. The city lights like 1,000 witnesses. The air buzzed with energy. Music pulsed low in the background. Waiters floated by with trays of hors d'oeuvres no one could pronounce. And then Vanessa Cole took the mic. Vanessa, Vice President of Corporate Strategy. Blonde bob sharp as a blade. Smile polished to perfection. She had a way of looking at you like she was measuring how much you were worth, never in dollars. Always in usefulness. She clinked her glass. The chatter died. Everyone turned. She started her speech with the usual corporate fluff, proud of the team. Exciting times ahead. Redwood family. My stomach tightened, because I knew these speeches. They always built up to a reveal. And then she said it. We're thrilled to announce the promotion of Daniel Fletcher to Senior Director of Operations. Daniel, you've shown exceptional leadership, and tonight, we celebrate you. Applause erupted, glasses raised, people cheered. But my ears rang, my chest went hollow, because that was supposed to be my promotion. Mine. Daniel Fletcher, a man who'd been at Redwood half the time I had, who once asked me how to run a basic SQL query like he was solving a riddle. Who spent more time networking at happy hours than actually doing the work. I smiled, because that's what you do. My lips curved while my jaw locked. I clapped, slow and steady, like I wasn't hearing my own future crack under the weight of her words. Vanessa glanced my way, just for a second, and I swear, there was something in her eyes. A flicker, satisfaction, like she wanted me to see that this was never meant for me. As the crowd swarmed Daniel, handshakes, backslaps, champagne toasts, I felt myself shrinking. Not just in the room, but in history. Everything I'd built, erased in a single sentence. My mind raced through the memories. Nights in Howard's computer lab. Mama's tired hands counting out rent money. Grandma's voice, keep your receipts. I wanted to scream, to walk up to Vanessa and demand answers. To shout that Daniel's promotion was built on my back. But I didn't, because I knew how this game was played. The angry black woman trope. They'd weaponize it before I even opened my mouth. So I swallowed it. I stood there with a champagne flute sweating in my hand, pretending to celebrate a victory that wasn't mine. My cheeks hurt from the smile I plastered on. My nails dug into my palm, leaving crescent moons that would last long after the music faded. And then Daniel, clueless, grinning Daniel, found me in the crowd. He clinked his glass against mine. Couldn't have done it without you, Aisha. The room laughed. Some people nodded like it was a joke. Others like it was true. My throat burned. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough that no one would remember it tomorrow. That's the kind of humiliation that doesn't stay on the rooftop. It burrows. It carves itself into your ribs. Later that night, I slipped away from the party. The elevator ride down felt endless. Mirrored walls reflecting a version of me I barely recognized. When the doors opened, the lobby was empty, just the echo of my heels clicking against marble. I walked out into the city. Neon lights flickering, taxis rushing past, the air smelled like rain and fried food from a street cart. I pulled out my phone. I almost called Mama, I almost said, "They did it again. They took what was mine." But I didn't. She'd hear it in my voice. And I couldn't stand the thought of her carrying my pain on top of everything else. Instead, I went home, sat in the dark of my apartment, the city glowing outside my window. I kicked off my heels, unbuttoned the blazer, and let the silence press down on me. That's when I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys. I thought about Grandma's words, receipts. And I realized, I had them. That humiliation, that toast, it didn't just break me. It lit a fuse. And when it burned through, Redwood would have no idea what hit them. I thought humiliation was the bottom. But life has a cruel way of showing you there's always another floor beneath the one you've just fallen through. The morning after my so-called exit interview, I sat in my apartment with the blinds pulled shut, letting only a sliver of Harlem daylight cut across the hardwood floor. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from coworkers, emails with subject lines like, "We'll miss you," and "So sorry, sis." None of it felt real. The people I thought had my back were sending emojis and shallow words. But nobody picked up the phone to call me. Nobody came to knock on my door. That's when the first breadcrumb fell into my lap. An old colleague, Darnell, sent me a single-line text. "Check the procurement contracts. Redwood ain't clean." No greeting, no emojis, just that. At first, I thought he was just trying to throw shade, maybe stir the pot while I was still reeling. But the message burned in my mind. Contracts. Redwood. Not clean. So I opened my laptop, my personal one. Not the sleek company-issued MacBook they'd already locked me out of. My hands shook as I typed in the name of a supplier Redwood had just signed a multi-million-dollar deal with. A construction outfit that was supposedly minority-owned and celebrated in every press release. I dug deeper. What I found made my blood run cold. The company wasn't minority-owned at all. The paperwork listed a woman of color as the CEO. But the real owners were Redwood executives hiding behind her name. They were using her face, her story, as a mask. To the public, it looked like Redwood was empowering black entrepreneurs. In reality, they were funneling contracts right back into their own pockets. I pushed away from my desk so fast my chair nearly toppled over. My chest rose and fell like I'd just run up 10 flights of stairs. I wasn't just fired because I'd made mistakes or underperformed. No, I was fired because I had started asking too many questions during those budget meetings. Because I had noticed the numbers didn't add up. Because I had been too close to uncovering this mess. They hadn't stripped me of my title out of professionalism. They had silenced me. And suddenly, the humiliation twisted into something else, rage. I thought back to my grandmother's voice. The one that carried me through long nights of doubt. "Baby, when they close one door, sometimes it's because they're hiding something behind it. Don't let them fool you." I hadn't understood it then. But now her words cut sharper than ever. I didn't sleep that night. I printed pages of contracts, built folders of screenshots, pieced together timelines from press releases and internal memos I'd saved over the years. My living room transformed into a war room, papers spread across the coffee table. Sticky notes on the walls. Red circles connecting names, dates, and amounts like I was building my own crime board. At some point, I caught my reflection in the black screen of my TV. My eyes were bloodshot. My braids were frizzing at the edges. And my hoodie hung off me like I hadn't eaten in days. I looked tired, yes, but I also looked alive. For the first time since they threw me out of that glass tower. I felt a fire in my chest. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the interns I mentored who thought they were joining a company that valued them. About the single mothers in HR who stayed late to balance books that were already cooked. About every young black engineer who walked into Redwood's shiny Midtown office thinking they had a shot at breaking barriers, only to be used as tokens in a diversity slideshow while the real power stayed locked in the same old hands. I couldn't unsee it, and I sure as hell couldn't stay silent. A few days later, I decided to test what I'd uncovered. I called Darnell, the one who dropped that breadcrumb. He didn't answer at first. When he finally picked up, his voice was a whisper. You found it, didn't you? My heart skipped. Yeah, the contracts, the shell companies, the whole damn scheme. Then you know why they pushed you out. His words cracked, like he'd been carrying this weight too long. I couldn't say it in the office. They're watching everything. But I couldn't just let you take the fall without knowing the truth. Why me? I asked. Why now? Because you were the only one bold enough to ask questions in those budget reviews. Everybody else kept their head down. But you kept receipts. They couldn't let that slide. For a moment, silence sat heavy between us. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. They've done this before. You're not the first. The first? My stomach knotted. Names flashed in my head. Colleagues who had resigned suddenly. Leaders who moved on to new opportunities. Staffers whose careers derailed without warning. All of them black. All of them silenced. This wasn't just a scheme. It was a pattern. When I hung up, I realized my discovery wasn't just about corporate fraud. It was about survival. Redwood had been feeding off the very people they claimed to uplift. And I had the receipts to prove it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the mess of papers and notes covering my living room. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. No, I felt dangerous. They thought firing me was the end of the story. But it was only the beginning. They thought I would crawl away quietly. That I'd lick my wounds in private. Maybe find another job, and pretend Redwood never happened. But silence has never been my strength. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Keeping this hidden would make me complicit. And complicity was something my grandmother never raised me for. She used to say, if you know the truth and stay quiet, you're just helping the lie grow stronger. I wasn't about to let their lie stand. The plan started small. I uploaded a thread on Twitter, nothing flashy. Just receipts, screenshots of contracts, copies of filings, highlights of discrepancies between Redwood's press releases and the actual documents I had. I hit post with trembling fingers. For a few minutes, nothing happened. My heart raced like I'd just pulled a fire alarm in a crowded building and was waiting for the sirens. Then the retweets started. First a trickle, then a flood. Journalists slid into my DMs asking for verification. Activist groups tagged me, demanding answers from Redwood. Former employees quietly liked my posts, silent nods of solidarity. Within hours, #RedwoodExposed was trending. By the next morning, my inbox was chaos. Reporters called nonstop, some promising primetime interviews, others begging for exclusives. My phone buzzed with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. And for the first time since I lost my job, I felt something like power. Still, I knew Redwood wasn't going to sit quietly while their empire burned. I pictured those glass boardroom walls. The men in tailored suits. The women in power dresses who never said my name without a smirk. They were probably circling like sharks, drafting statements, calling in PR firms, trying to spin the story before it swallowed them whole. But I had one advantage. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I wasn't bound by corporate emails, non-disclosure agreements, or office politics. I was free. That freedom gave me courage when the cameras finally pointed my way. The first interview was with a local Harlem station. I chose them deliberately, not CNN, not CNBC, not one of the big national platforms. I wanted my community to hear me first. I wanted the people who rode the subway with me, who bought groceries at the same corner store, who prayed in the same churches, to know the truth before anyone else. The reporter asked me to sit in front of a plain backdrop. I wore no fancy blazer, no carefully staged outfit, just a simple black turtleneck and gold hoop earrings, my grandmother's hoops. Why did Redwood fire you? She asked. I looked straight into the camera, my throat dry but my voice steady. Because I asked the wrong questions. And because I refused to be quiet when I noticed money being funneled through fake contracts. They didn't just fire me, they tried to bury the truth. The silence that followed was heavy. The reporter shifted uncomfortably, maybe worried about liability, but she let me keep talking. And I did, for 20 minutes straight. When the interview aired that night, the response was immediate. My phone lit up with calls, texts, DMs. But what hit me hardest wasn't the attention. It was the messages from people who'd been through the same thing. A black woman in Detroit messaged, "They did the same to me at my firm. Thank you for speaking out." A young engineer in Atlanta wrote, "I thought I was crazy for noticing. Now I know I'm not alone." Even a former Redwood intern reached out, "Sis, I saw things I couldn't explain. You just put the pieces together for me." Every message reminded me, this wasn't just my fight. Of course, Redwood clapped back. They released a polished statement within 24 hours. Dripping with corporate jargon, Redwood Global stands firmly against any accusations of misconduct. We remain committed to diversity and integrity. It was the same script they'd always used, carefully written to sound noble while saying absolutely nothing. But this time, nobody was buying it. The receipts were too clear, the questions too loud. Reporters dug deeper, pulling old financial records, uncovering patterns that matched exactly what I'd exposed. Even Redwood's loyal investors started whispering. For once, the empire looked shaky. The moment I'll never forget came at a public town hall meeting in Midtown. Activists had organized a protest outside Redwood's headquarters, and they asked me to speak. I hesitated at first, me, standing on a stage with microphones, facing a sea of people chanting. I wasn't sure I had that kind of fire in me. But when I walked up to that mic, saw hundreds of black and brown faces staring back at me, some holding signs with my words printed on them, I knew I couldn't turn back. I took a deep breath, the kind that settles in your chest like armor. They thought firing me would silence me, I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. But what they didn't understand is this: you can take away a paycheck, a title, a desk in a corner office, but you can't take away the truth. And you can't take away a community that refuses to be lied to. The crowd roared, fists pumped in the air. And in that moment, I realized, this fight was no longer just about exposing Redwood. It was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting the rules, and proving that no matter how powerful they seemed, no corporation could crush us when we stood together. That night, as I walked home under the Harlem streetlights, exhaustion pressed heavy on my shoulders. But underneath it all, I felt something new, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Because the truth was out there now, and no PR statement could put it back in the dark. The more Redwood denied, the more the truth pressed down on them like a storm they couldn't outrun. Within weeks, congressional committees were asking questions. Journalists kept digging, uncovering more fraud that stretched back years. Activist groups were filing petitions demanding a federal investigation. And at the center of it all was me. I never asked to be the face of this fight. But once you put the truth in the light, you can't control where it goes. The media branded me as the whistleblower. My face appeared on magazine covers, in op-eds, in late-night talk show monologues. Friends joked that I was Harlem's Erin Brockovich. But the weight of it all sat heavy on me. Because this wasn't about fame. It was about survival, mine. And the survival of every young black professional who thought they could build a future inside corporations like Redwood. The real showdown came when Redwood's executives were forced into a public hearing. It wasn't just any hearing. It was televised, streamed live, watched in coffee shops, barbershops, and living rooms across the country. I was invited to testify. The night before, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by folders and notes. My grandmother's Bible lay open in front of me, not because I was looking for scripture, but because her handwritten notes in the margins always gave me strength. One line she had underlined years ago caught my eye: "The truth will set you free." I clutched that thought like a shield. When I walked into the hearing room the next morning, the air was electric. Rows of cameras clicked, protesters chanted outside, their voices leaking through the walls. And at the long polished table sat Redwood's leadership, faces I knew all too well. There was Thomas Greer, the CEO, the same man who once praised me at a holiday gala for my commitment to diversity. Now staring straight ahead with his jaw tight. Next to him sat Evelyn Marks, head of finance, The woman who'd smiled at me in every budget meeting while signing off on fraudulent numbers. They looked smaller now, not physically, but spiritually, like the power had started to drain from them. I took my seat across from them, adjusted the microphone, and waited for the questions to begin. A senator leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, can you tell us in your own words what you discovered while employed at Redwood Global?" I cleared my throat, my palms slick with sweat. But when I opened my mouth, the words flowed steady. I discovered that Redwood Global used fraudulent shell companies to funnel millions of dollars back to their executives. They did this under the guise of minority-owned business partnerships, parading themselves as champions of diversity. In reality, they exploited black and brown faces as cover for their greed. When I asked questions, I was silenced. When I persisted, I was terminated. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Thomas Greer shifted uncomfortably but kept his poker face. Evelyn scribbled notes she'd never use. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The senators grilled Redwood's executives next. Watching them squirm was almost surreal. Greer tried to spin the narrative, throwing out phrases like miscommunication and internal review. Evelyn clutched at legal jargon, hiding behind phrases like to the best of our knowledge. But the receipts I had brought, emails, contracts, signatures, cut through every lie. At one point, a senator held up one of my printed documents. "Mr. Greer, this contract clearly shows that the listed minority owner was a proxy. Care to explain why your signature is on this page?" The CEO's silence was louder than any excuse. That was the moment I knew Redwood wasn't walking away from this clean. Outside the hearing, the world shifted. News outlets ran headlines like, "Redwood whistleblower exposes corporate fraud," and "Diversity or deception?" The Redwood scandal. Social media erupted with hashtags demanding justice. But what hit me deepest were the voices from my own community. Elders stopped me in the street, thanking me for standing tall. Young professionals messaged me, saying my fight gave them courage to challenge shady practices at their own jobs. Church mothers hugged me tight, whispering prayers in my ear. It wasn't just about Redwood anymore. It was about us, about refusing to be silent in spaces that profit off our silence. The pressure grew so heavy that Redwood had no choice but to announce reforms. They promised a full independent audit. They pledged to restructure their board to include real minority leadership, not just figureheads. They set aside millions for restitution and community investment. Was it sincere? Probably not. Corporations rarely move from the heart. They move when the money and reputation are on the line. But still, it was movement. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the empire was cracking. That night, after the hearing, I walked through Harlem under the glow of neon signs and streetlights. Kids played on stoops. Music drifted from an open window, an old Sam Cooke record, singing about change coming. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, to believe. Redwood had tried to bury me. Instead, they planted a seed they could never control. And the roots were spreading. The day Redwood finally broke felt nothing like I imagined. It wasn't confetti falling from the ceiling. It wasn't some Hollywood moment where villains confessed their sins under the weight of truth. No, it was messier, louder, rawer, but it was also more real. It started with a press conference. Redwood had called it, desperate to control the narrative after the hearings. Their executives stood on stage behind a podium, draped in a backdrop with the company's bold red and white logo. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. I watched from the back of the room, arms folded, heart pounding. The CEO, Thomas Greer, stepped up to the microphone. His tie was crooked, his smile forced. "Redwood Global," he began, "remains committed to integrity and to the communities we serve. Any misunderstandings?" That word, misunderstandings, my blood boiled. Because it wasn't a misunderstanding when they forged contracts. It wasn't a misunderstanding when they silenced me, or when they used black faces as props for their fraud. It was exploitation, and it was intentional. I took a deep breath, pushed through the crowd, and walked straight to the front. Cameras swiveled. Gasps rippled through the room. Greer froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he saw me approach. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady but sharp, like steel wrapped in velvet. "But we're not going to let you spin this as a misunderstanding. This was theft, this was fraud, and this was disrespect, to me, to our community, and to every black and brown professional who ever believed your promises." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones extended toward me like 1,000 arrows. And for the first time, Redwood couldn't hide. The confrontation went viral within hours. Clips of me standing toe-to-toe with Redwood's CEO flooded social media. Headlines read, "Whistleblower confronts Redwood on live TV," and "Harlem woman calls out corporate giant." But what made me proud wasn't the headlines. It was the comments. People wrote, "That's my sister right there. She said what we all been thinking. They can't bury the truth anymore." For once, I wasn't alone in the fight. In the days that followed, Redwood collapsed under the pressure. Investors pulled out. Government regulators launched full-scale investigations. Their stock plummeted, and board members resigned one by one. The empire that once looked untouchable now crumbled in public view. But my victory wasn't just about Redwood falling. It was about me rising. A week later, I stood on stage at a community forum in Harlem. It wasn't a fancy venue, just a rec center with folding chairs and a microphone that crackled now and then. But the room was packed. Elders sat in the front row. Kids in hoodies leaned against the walls. Activists held clipboards, and local leaders filled the seats. They had asked me to speak, not as a victim, but as a voice. I looked out at the crowd and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't humiliated or broken. I was exactly where I was meant to be. I gripped the microphone. They tried to bury me under lies. But they forgot one thing. I said, "Seeds grow in the dark. And look what we've grown together." Applause thundered through the room. This isn't just about Redwood. This is about every corporation that thinks it can profit off our pain. This is about demanding accountability. About building companies that don't just use our faces, but listen to our voices. This is about proving that we are more than tokens. We are the foundation. And without us, they crumble. The cheers rose so loud. I felt them in my chest. That night, I walked home with tears in my eyes. Not from sadness, but from release. I thought back to that first day when Redwood fired me. When humiliation choked me so hard I could barely breathe. I thought about the nights in my apartment, piecing together evidence by lamplight, fueled only by anger and determination. I thought about my grandmother's voice telling me to stand tall. And I realized, I hadn't just survived Redwood. I had transformed because of it. They thought they were writing my ending. Instead, I had written a new beginning. Weeks later, when the government announced sweeping reforms for corporate contracting, policies directly influenced by the Redwood scandal, I felt pride ripple through me. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. Every young black professional who walked into a corporate office would now walk with just a little more power. A little more safety. A little more truth at their back. And that, more than anything, was the victory I had been fighting for. When it was all said and done, I realized the real victory wasn't getting my title back, or even watching Redwood bend under the pressure. The real victory was this: I never lost myself. They could strip away the office, the paycheck, the so-called prestige, but they could never take my voice, my faith, or the legacy running through my veins. And this story, it's not just mine. It belongs to every one of us who's ever been told to stay quiet, to play small, to accept less. So here's the truth. Don't let anyone else write your story. When they try to push you down, remember, we were born to rise. Right finger if this hit you. Smash that like red heart and share so more of us can feel this power. Right finger drop your own story in the comments. We rise louder when we rise together. Right finger, and if you know it's our time to be heard, type it out right now. We rise together.